Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to have everything you could ever want, money, success, fame, and still find yourself feeling lost, as if something's missing? What if one unexpected conversation turned your entire world upside down, forcing you to confront the one thing you thought you'd already mastered, your own life? That's exactly what happened to Francis Malone. Francis had it all: wealth, a thriving business empire, and the respect of his peers. He had worked tirelessly for years, making smart investments and building an empire from the ground up. Yet, something wasn't right. There was always a void in his life, one that wealth couldn't fill. The more successful he became, the more isolated he felt. He found himself attending endless parties, events, and meetings, yet no matter how many people surrounded him, he could never shake the feeling of being alone. His family, his wife, Jennifer, and their 2 teenage kids, were distant. He had lost touch with them, too consumed by work to really notice. The truth was, he didn't know how to reconnect with them. That evening, Francis found himself at yet another extravagant gathering, this time, a private cocktail party hosted by one of the biggest tech moguls in Silicon Valley. The room buzzed with conversations of mergers, acquisitions, and high-end investments. The elite of the elite roamed freely, their discussions always focused on the next big thing. Francis wasn't interested in any of it. His mind kept wandering to his family, to his daughter's birthday last week that he missed, to the unread texts from Jennifer asking him to come home early for once. He wasn't living the life he had always dreamed of. He was simply existing. As he stood near the bar, nursing a glass of bourbon, someone, caught his attention. A young man, no older than 18 or 19, was standing across the room, alone. He had an air of calm confidence about him, an aura that stood in stark contrast to the frenetic energy surrounding them all. His sharp features and light, almost white blonde hair made him easy to spot in a crowd. But what really made him stand out was the way he was observing the people around him, like he wasn't quite a part of this world, yet at the same time, belonged to it. Francis didn't think much of it at first. After all, it wasn't unusual to see young prodigies and heirs to fortunes at these kinds of events. But then, the young man looked directly at him and smiled. It wasn't just a polite smile, it was a knowing smile. A smile that told Francis that the young man had something to say, something important. And for reasons he couldn't explain, it piqued his curiosity. Before Francis could move, the young man made his way over. He extended his hand with a firm but not overly eager grip. "Francis Malone, right?" the young man asked. His voice was clear, intelligent, almost older than his years. "Yeah, that's me," Francis replied, feeling a little surprised. "And you are?" The young man smiled again, this time more warmly. "I'm Xander Musk. Elon's son." If Francis hadn't been holding a drink, he might have dropped it. Xander Musk? The son of the tech mogul, the man who had changed the world. The name hit him like a thunderclap. He'd heard rumors that Elon Musk's kids were eccentric, but to meet one in person, it seemed unreal. "Wait, you're, really?" Francis managed to ask, still trying to process the fact that this young man was standing in front of him. "Yeah, I know, not what you expected, right?" Xander said with a shrug, as if he were used to this reaction. "Everyone assumes I'm just like my father, but I'm not. I'm just me." For some reason, Francis found himself laughing. Xander's self-awareness was refreshing. It made him feel more grounded, less like he was talking to some otherworldly figure. And yet, there was something about him, a quiet intensity that Francis couldn't quite place. "Well, I'm not sure what I expected, to be honest," Francis replied. "But it's nice to meet you. I didn't think you'd be at an event like this." Xander chuckled. "I don't usually come to these things, but it's good to meet people outside of the circle." He paused for a moment, as if thinking about his next words carefully. "So, tell me, Francis, do you ever feel like you're running in the wrong direction?" The question hit Francis hard. He blinked, momentarily stunned. What did this kid, this teenager, know about his life, about the pressure, the loneliness, the constant pursuit of more? He had never really stopped to question the direction he was heading in. He had always been so focused on the next goal, the next milestone, that he had forgotten to ask himself whether any of it actually mattered. Running in the wrong direction? Francis echoed, unsure of how to respond. Yeah, Xander said with a slight tilt of his head. You're chasing after something, but I don't think it's the right thing. The words lingered in the air like a puzzle waiting to be solved. Francis didn't know how to react. This was exactly the kind of conversation he never expected to have with the child of one of the wealthiest men on the planet. Yet, there was something in Xander's eyes that made him want to hear more. You don't know me, Xander, Francis said with a nervous laugh. You have no idea what I'm chasing. Xander smiled, but it wasn't an arrogant smile. It was knowing, almost empathetic. I might not know the specifics of your life, but I know what it's like to be so focused on something that you lose sight of everything else. Believe me, I've seen it happen to people much smarter, much richer than you. Francis was taken aback. This kid, no, this young man, seemed wise beyond his years. He'd only just met him, yet already, Xander had managed to pierce through the layers of his carefully constructed life, calling into question everything he thought he knew. There was a brief silence between them before Xander spoke again. Here's the thing, Francis, Xander said, his voice soft yet firm. You're not going to find what you're looking for in all this, he gestured around them to the glittering party, no matter how much you achieve. The truth is, you might have everything, but if you're not paying attention to the right things, you'll lose it all. Francis's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just idle conversation anymore. It was a challenge, an invitation to see things differently. Xander Musk, this teenager who had lived a life most could only dream of, was telling him something profound. Something that had the power to change everything. Before Francis could respond, Xander gave him a small, almost cryptic smile. I'll leave you with that thought. Think about it. With that, Xander turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd, leaving Francis standing there, stunned. As the night wore on, Francis couldn't shake the feeling that the universe had just handed him a wake-up call. He'd come to the party expecting nothing more than to network and enjoy the usual conversations, but now, he found himself at the beginning of something much deeper. Something that might just force him to reconsider everything he'd built his life upon. And for the first time in years, Francis felt a sense of unease, and curiosity, about what was to come. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Francis Malone was no stranger to success. Born into a middle-class family in a small town, he had always been determined to rise above the modest beginnings that had defined his early years. His father, a hard-working mechanic, had instilled in him a relentless work ethic. Francis was taught that hard work equaled success, that every sacrifice made today would pay off tomorrow. That philosophy had been his guiding light for most of his life. From a young age, Francis knew he was different. While other kids were playing sports or hanging out with friends, he was at his desk, reading business magazines, learning about economics, and studying how successful entrepreneurs built their empires. He had always been fascinated by the stories of people like Steve Jobs, Richard Branson, and Jeff Bezos, men who had changed the world, who had started with nothing and created something monumental. Francis's path to success was paved with sacrifice and late nights. He worked his way through college, juggling 2 jobs while earning his degree in business. His tenacity paid off when, at the age of 28, he launched his first startup, a tech company that focused on innovative software solutions for small businesses. His first product took off faster than he could have ever imagined. Investors poured in, and within just 5 years, Francis's company became a leading player in the industry. But success came with its own set of challenges. The more Francis achieved, the less time he had for the things that once mattered most to him. The early days of his relationship with Jennifer, his wife, were filled with passion and dreams of a shared future. But as his business grew, so did the distance between them. Jennifer, a talented graphic designer, had her own career, but her dreams of traveling and enjoying life together with Francis faded as he became consumed by work. Their children, Emma and Luke, had grown up in the shadow of his ambition. They had everything a child could ask for: expensive toys, private schools, vacations to exotic places, but they didn't have his time. They didn't have his attention. And that, he realized, was the one thing they truly needed. By the time Francis was 40, he had everything. He was living in a multi-million-dollar mansion, driving luxury cars, and attending gala events with the country's elite. But he wasn't happy. There was an emptiness that no amount of wealth could fill. His relationship with Jennifer was strained. She had become more of a distant figure in his life than a partner. Emma and Luke had grown into teenagers, and while he had tried to stay connected with them, the bond had been broken long ago. Francis had convinced himself that the sacrifices he made for success were worth it. He told himself that he was doing it for his family, for their future, and for the legacy he would leave behind. But deep down, he knew something wasn't right. He had lost the ability to enjoy the simple pleasures of life. His conversations were always about work, about expansion, about profit margins, about the next big venture. The constant hustle had drained him of the joy he once found in the little things. He hadn't been present for his children's milestones. He hadn't shared a quiet evening with Jennifer in years. But then, something changed. One fateful night at that cocktail party, everything shifted. Meeting Xander Musk was the catalyst that began to unravel the carefully constructed life Francis had built. The teenager, with his sharp observations and calm demeanor, had forced Francis to look at himself in a way he hadn't done in years. The words Xander had spoken to him about chasing the wrong things gnawed at him. Was his life really about chasing the next goal, the next deal? Was success truly about having everything, or was it about something more, something deeper? It was hard for Francis to admit, but that one brief conversation with Xander Musk had struck a chord. It made him question everything. He realized that while he had been chasing success, he had been running in the wrong direction. The thought lingered in his mind for days after the event. What was it that he was really after? What did he truly want from life? Francis spent the following week in a haze of contemplation. He kept thinking about Xander's words, but also about his own life. It wasn't just about business anymore. It wasn't about the next deal or the next investment opportunity. It was about finding meaning again. It was about rediscovering the relationships that had once been so important to him. But could he do it? Could he really change the course of his life after all these years of focused ambition? There were times when he felt the weight of doubt creeping in. He had spent so many years building this empire, sacrificing everything for it. Could he walk away from it all now? Could he reconnect with Jennifer and his children? Would they even want him to? The thought of losing everything, the business, the reputation, the status, was terrifying. But the thought of continuing down the same path, never truly living, was even more frightening. That evening, as he sat at his desk, staring at his phone, Francis found himself scrolling through old photos of his family. There were pictures of Jennifer and him on their honeymoon, smiling and carefree. There were photos of Emma's first birthday, of Luke's soccer games, of vacations they'd taken together. He saw the joy in their faces, the laughter, the closeness. And then he saw the photos that came after, the ones where they were all together, but he was distant. He wasn't really there. He had been too consumed by work, by the chase, to truly be present. A knot formed in his stomach. He couldn't undo the past. He couldn't go back in time and make up for all the missed moments. But he could do something now. He could change. And maybe, just maybe, he could start rebuilding the relationships he had neglected for so long. The next morning, Francis made a decision. He would stop running. He would stop chasing after things that didn't truly matter. He would start by reaching out to Jennifer, trying to reconnect with her. He would make an effort to be there for Emma and Luke, to show them that they mattered more than any business deal. He didn't know what the future held, but he was willing to try. For the first time in a long time, Francis felt a flicker of hope. He didn't know what would come next, but he was ready to find out. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was the only road that mattered now. The days that followed were a whirlwind of change for Francis. The decision to step back from his business, to try to repair the relationships he had neglected for years, was not as easy as it had sounded in his mind. Despite the resolve he had felt the night he made his decision, the reality of it was a lot more complicated than he had anticipated. The first hurdle came in the form of Jennifer. She had always been supportive of his career, at least in the early years, but over time, her patience had worn thin. The countless nights he had spent away from home, the missed family dinners, the forgotten anniversaries, these had all left deep scars. She had long stopped asking him to come home early, she had stopped asking him for anything at all. Jennifer had built a life for herself in his absence. She had found friends, hobbies, and even a certain quiet contentment in being independent. It wasn't the life she had dreamed of when they first got married, but it was the one she had learned to accept. That first evening, after his decision, Francis sat down at the kitchen table with Jennifer. She was sitting across from him, her eyes tired, as if she had already given up on expecting anything to change. The silence hung between them like a thick fog. "Jen, I've been thinking," Francis began, his voice faltering. He didn't know how to start. He had spent so much time in the world of numbers and business strategies that he had forgotten how to speak from the heart, especially to the woman who had once been his everything. Jennifer raised an eyebrow, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Thinking about what, Francis? About how to make more money? About the next deal? Or are you finally thinking about us?" Her words stung, more than he expected. She wasn't wrong. He had been so consumed with work that he had neglected their marriage. He had neglected her. "I'm not thinking about deals anymore, Jennifer," he said quietly. "I've been thinking about you. About us. About how much I've messed up. And how I want to fix it." Jennifer's expression softened, but only slightly. "Francis, I don't even know who you are anymore," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've been gone for so long, even when you were right here. I don't know how to just pick up where we left off." The words hit him hard. He had known things weren't perfect, but he hadn't realized just how distant they had become. He had always thought that the work would be enough, that providing for her and the kids would somehow make up for the emotional distance. But now, sitting across from her, he saw the painful truth: it wasn't enough. "I'm sorry, Jen," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have been there. I should have been present, for you, for the kids. But I wasn't. I can't undo that, but I can try. I will try." Jennifer didn't say anything for a long moment. Francis could see the conflict in her eyes, the desire to believe him, but also the fear of getting hurt again. It wasn't going to be easy. They both knew that. Finally, she nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I want to believe you, Francis. But you need to prove it. You can't just say the words. You have to show me." Francis felt a pang in his chest, but also a glimmer of hope. This wasn't going to be a quick fix, but it was a start. He had the chance to make things right, even if it meant starting from the very beginning. The next day, things didn't improve much. The old habits, the overwhelming pressure of his company, the constant barrage of emails and phone calls, it all threatened to pull him back into the same cycle he had promised to break. His assistant called him, informing him of several urgent matters that needed his attention, and before he knew it, he was back at his desk, replying to emails and rescheduling meetings. The urge to dive back into work was overwhelming. After all, it had been his lifeline for so long, and it was hard to resist the familiar rhythm of productivity. But as he glanced at his phone, he saw a message from Jennifer. It was short but loaded with meaning. "Are we doing this, or is this just another phase?" Her words hit him like a cold shower. It was a reality check, a reminder that he couldn't just say he wanted change, he had to act on it. The tension in his chest tightened. The conflict inside him was growing. On one hand, there was the undeniable pull of his company, the need to secure his legacy, to maintain his reputation. On the other hand, there was the aching realization that he had neglected the very people who mattered most. His wife. His kids. Was it too late to fix things? Could he balance both worlds, or would he lose everything? His phone buzzed again, this time with a notification about an important business meeting that would take place the following day. A new venture, a new deal. It was the kind of opportunity Francis had lived for in the past, the kind that promised growth, success, and more power. But as he read the message, he felt nothing. No excitement, no passion. Just a gnawing emptiness. He put the phone down and stared at the wall, his mind racing. Was it possible to have it all, to have success in his career and success in his personal life? Or would he always be torn between the two, never able to fully give himself to either? In that moment, Francis realized that he was standing at a crossroads. He could continue on the same path, pursue the next big deal, bury himself deeper into the world of business, and hope that his relationships would somehow work themselves out. Or he could take the risk of truly changing. Of stepping back, of letting go of the constant drive for more, and focus on rebuilding what he had lost. But it wasn't just about his own choices anymore. His family had to be part of the equation. He couldn't just make this decision for himself. He had to involve Jennifer, Emma, and Luke. He had to let them in. They had to see that he was serious about change, that he was willing to sacrifice the things that had once mattered so much to him. That evening, after a long day of back and forths between his family and his business, Francis sat down to dinner with Jennifer. The kids were at the table too, but the silence between them all was palpable. Francis could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The tension was thick, but he knew that this was the moment where everything could either change or fall apart. "Jennifer, I know I've been absent," he began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "But I want you to know, I'm here now. I want to be a part of this family again. And I need your help. I need to show you, not just tell you, that I'm committed to change." Jennifer looked at him, her face unreadable. The kids didn't speak. The air was thick with uncertainty. But Francis knew one thing for sure, the road ahead was going to be rocky, filled with challenges and moments of doubt. But it was the only road worth taking. And so, the journey to rebuild his life had officially begun. The weeks that followed were a series of small, but significant steps forward for Francis. He had made the conscious decision to step back from his business, but the transition wasn't as smooth as he had hoped. Every day, he faced a new battle, not just with the overwhelming pressures of his career, but with the complex emotional terrain of reconnecting with the people he loved. Jennifer, while willing to give him a chance, was cautious. It wasn't easy for her to just forget the years of neglect, the promises he had broken, and the life they had led that felt more like two people living parallel lives than partners in a marriage. Every attempt he made to engage her in conversation, to share his thoughts and emotions, was met with a level of wariness. She would listen, nod, and occasionally offer a few words, but there was a distance that couldn't be bridged in just a few weeks. Francis had underestimated how long it would take to earn back her trust. As for Emma and Luke, his children, the road was no less challenging. They had grown accustomed to his absence, and now that he was trying to be more present, it felt almost like he was a stranger to them. Emma, at 16, was a force of her own. She was independent, strong-willed, and smart, but there was an edge to her demeanor whenever Francis tried to engage with her. She had her own world now, one that didn't include him. Luke, at 12, was a little more open, but even he didn't know how to react to his father's sudden presence. They had both built their lives around his absence, and suddenly, he was there, trying to rewrite their reality. It wasn't just the emotional wall they had built that was difficult to scale. It was also the sheer logistics of their lives. Jennifer had her own schedule, Emma was often out with friends, and Luke had school activities and sports. Francis had to learn to navigate this new dynamic. He couldn't just walk in and expect things to go back to normal. This was a new version of normal, and it would require all of them to adjust. One of the first moments that made Francis realize just how deep the divide had become was during a family dinner. It had been weeks since he had set the dinner table himself, and he had decided to cook, a small gesture to show that he was committed to being there for them. But when they sat down at the table, there was an uncomfortable silence. No one seemed to know what to say. Jennifer picked at her food, Emma scrolled through her phone, and Luke fiddled with his utensils. It felt more like a meeting than a family dinner. Finally, after a long stretch of silence, Francis spoke. "I know it's been hard," he said, his voice steady but with an underlying vulnerability. "But I want you all to know that I'm trying. I'm not just here physically, I'm here, really here. I want to be part of your lives again." Jennifer looked at him, her expression unreadable. Emma didn't even look up from her phone, but Luke glanced at his father, then back down at his plate. "I'm not asking for forgiveness right now," Francis continued. "But I hope you'll give me a chance to show you that I'm serious about this. I want to be the father and the husband that you all deserve. But I can't do it alone. I need you all with me on this." It was a simple, honest statement, but the weight of it hung heavy in the room. They were all staring at their plates, each person lost in their own thoughts. Jennifer set her fork down and met his eyes. "Francis," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "It's not that easy. You can't just show up and expect everything to be okay. It doesn't work like that. We've been living without you for so long. You've been absent. And now you want to waltz in and fix everything in a matter of weeks." Francis felt a pang of guilt. She was right. It wasn't going to be that simple. But he couldn't just give up either. He had to try, even if it took years. "I know," he said, his voice low. "But I'm here now. I can't change the past, but I can make things right going forward. I just need you to give me a chance to prove it." The rest of the dinner passed in tense silence. No one said much after that. The conversation was strained, like the frayed edges of a rope that had been pulled too tight. But even though the night had been far from perfect, it was a step forward. They had all acknowledged the change, however small. That night, Francis went to bed feeling the weight of the journey ahead. The following days were filled with small attempts at reconnection. Francis started to drive the kids to school when he could. He offered to help with their homework, though both Emma and Luke politely declined. But he kept trying. He attended Luke's soccer game, even though he could see that his son was embarrassed by his presence. He sat down with Jennifer in the evenings, trying to talk about more than just work. They talked about the weather, about old memories, and about their dreams, though the conversation always felt somewhat foreign. Jennifer was hesitant, but there were moments, fleeting moments, when he saw a flicker of warmth in her eyes. But the real turning point came unexpectedly. One Saturday afternoon, Francis was in his home office, going over some reports for the company. He had promised himself that he would take the day off, but old habits died hard. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and there stood Emma. She didn't knock or ask for permission. She just stood there, looking at him. "I thought you were taking the day off," she said, her voice flat but with an edge to it that made Francis look up. "I am," he replied, setting down the papers. "I just got caught up in something." "What's up?" Emma crossed her arms, staring at him. "I don't get you, Dad. You've always been so wrapped up in your work, and now you want to pretend like everything's fine. Like you're just going to swoop in and fix things. You can't just do that. Francis felt the weight of her words, but he didn't retreat. I know, Emma. I've made mistakes. A lot of them. And I'm not trying to fix everything in a day, but I am trying. I'm trying to be here for you. And I'm sorry for not being here before. There was a long pause. Emma didn't say anything at first, but her eyes softened just a little. I don't know if I can forgive you, Dad. But I'll try. I'll try to give you a chance. Francis nodded, the weight of the conversation sinking in. That's all I'm asking for. And with that, Emma left the room. It wasn't an earth-shattering moment, but it was a breakthrough. It was a sign that, despite the tension and resistance, there was hope. Francis had no illusions about how difficult the road ahead would be. This wasn't going to be an overnight transformation. But he was finally on the right path. And with each small step forward, he felt a little closer to finding what he had been missing all these years. The journey had just begun. The days blurred together, filled with small victories and heart-wrenching setbacks. Francis knew this was the turning point, this was where his resolve would either solidify or collapse. Every moment with Jennifer, Emma, and Luke felt like a delicate thread, strung tight between them, ready to snap at the slightest strain. But as each day passed, he began to notice changes, both in his family and himself. The real turning point, however, came when Francis found himself at a crossroads, a moment that would forever alter the course of his efforts to rebuild his life. It started with a phone call. Francis had been working in his home office, reviewing some figures for a new project, when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. It was Jennifer, calling him. He had expected a text or a quick chat later, but this felt different. She never called during the day unless it was something important. Hello, he answered, his voice a little too sharp. Francis, Jennifer's voice came through, strained, but steady. I think we need to talk. A sinking feeling settled in his stomach. He felt the familiar tension rise, the feeling that something was about to shatter. He had no idea what it could be, but he had learned by now that every conversation with Jennifer carried weight. Sure, Jen. What's going on? There was a long pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was low, filled with a depth of emotion that immediately put him on edge. It's about Emma. His heart skipped a beat. What about her? She's been pulling away from me, Jennifer said, her voice trembling slightly. And I don't know what to do. I've tried, but she's becoming more and more distant. I don't think she even knows how to talk to me anymore. The words hit him like a physical blow. Francis had been so caught up in his own journey, in trying to rebuild his own relationship with his family, that he had failed to see the cracks forming under the surface with Emma. He had assumed that because she was older and more independent, she was handling everything fine. But that was a naive assumption. She was struggling too, and he hadn't noticed until now. I don't know how to help her, Jennifer continued, her voice shaky now. I think she's angry at me. And I think she's angry at you, too. You've been absent for so long, Francis. She doesn't know how to deal with you being here, with you trying to fix things when you weren't there before. I think she's afraid of getting hurt again. The word struck Francis like a cold wave. He had been so focused on trying to fix things with Jennifer, trying to show her he was committed to changing, that he had neglected Emma's pain. He had neglected the impact his absence had on her. He couldn't just show up and expect everything to be okay. Emma was hurt, too, and he had no idea how deep that hurt went. I'll talk to her, he said, his voice quiet, but firm. I'll fix this. I'll make sure she knows I'm here. I'll do whatever it takes. Jennifer sighed heavily. I hope so. Because right now, I'm not sure either of us know how to help her. As the call ended, Francis felt a knot of dread in his chest. This wasn't just about reconciling with Jennifer anymore. This was about saving the relationship with his daughter, about proving to her that he wasn't going anywhere, that he could be the father she needed, not the distant figure she had grown to resent. The next day, Francis took the first step. He asked Emma to meet him after school, a simple request, but one that sent a ripple of unease through him. He had no idea how she would respond. Would she even want to talk to him? Would she shut him out completely? When Emma walked into the living room later that afternoon, she seemed distant, her eyes downcast, her arms folded tightly across her chest. She looked so much like Jennifer in that moment, guarded, defensive, unwilling to let anyone in. Francis felt a wave of guilt wash over him. He had been so wrapped up in his own struggle to redeem himself that he had ignored her pain, her silence. "Hey, Emma," he said softly, trying to keep his voice steady. "Thanks for meeting with me." She nodded briefly, but didn't say anything. The silence was thick between them, like an impenetrable wall. Francis tried to find the right words, but none seemed to come. Instead, he just blurted out the truth. "I know I've messed up, Emma," he began, his voice cracking slightly. "I've been absent, I've been selfish, and I've hurt you. I wasn't there when you needed me, and for that, I'm sorry. I can't change the past, but I want to change now. I want to be here for you. And I'm not going anywhere." Emma's eyes flickered, and for the first time in weeks, he saw something more than anger in her gaze. There was pain. A lot of it. But also something else, something that made him realize just how deep her hurt went. "You can't just show up, Dad," she said, her voice trembling. "You don't get it. I'm not a little kid anymore. I've had to figure out everything on my own. I can't just forget that you weren't there. I don't know how to just let you in." Francis felt his chest tighten. Her words were a punch to the gut, but he couldn't deny their truth. He had missed so much of her life, her teenage years, her struggles, her triumphs, and now, she was a stranger to him. He had no right to expect things to just go back to how they were. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," he said quietly. "I know it's going to take time. But I want to earn your trust, Emma. I want to be the father you deserve, not the one I've been." Emma looked at him for a long moment. The tension in the room was unbearable. Then, slowly, she nodded. "I'm not saying I'm going to forgive you. But I'll try. I'll try to give you a chance." Francis felt a weight lift off his chest, though he knew this was far from over. This was just the beginning. Emma wasn't going to let him off the hook easily. And she shouldn't. He had a long way to go to prove himself. As Emma walked out of the room, Francis sat there in the silence, feeling both relieved and devastated. This wasn't the magical reconciliation he had imagined in his dreams, but it was a step forward. And that was all he could ask for. In that moment, he understood something fundamental. Healing wasn't about one grand gesture. It wasn't about saying the right words or doing something spectacular. It was about showing up, day after day, even when it hurt, even when it felt like nothing was changing. It was about proving, through his actions, that he was worthy of their love and trust. The journey was far from over. But at that moment, for the first time in a long while, Francis believed it might just be possible to make it right. The days following his conversation with Emma were a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Francis could feel a change in the air, a shift in his approach, in the way he viewed his family, and in the way they began to view him. Emma was still distant, but the walls that had once seemed impenetrable were starting to crack, just a little. It wasn't the breakthrough he had hoped for, but it was progress. That was all he could ask for. Over the next few weeks, Francis continued to do the work. He didn't expect immediate forgiveness, nor did he expect to be met with open arms. But he wasn't going to retreat either. Each day, he tried to be present in small ways, driving the kids to school, sitting with Jennifer at the breakfast table, taking the time to listen when they spoke. He didn't force conversations. He didn't try to fill every moment with words. He simply allowed the space for his family to come to him when they were ready. But there was one moment that made everything start to feel real, that made him believe, truly believe, that things might work out. It was a Friday night, and the house was quieter than usual. Jennifer was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, and Emma was in her room. Luke had gone to bed early for once, and Francis was left alone, sitting on the couch. He had been going over some business proposals, but he wasn't really focused. His mind kept drifting to the events of the past few weeks, the difficult conversations, the small breakthroughs, and the painful moments of realization that he had been absent for too long. Then, unexpectedly, Jennifer walked into the living room, holding a glass of wine. She didn't speak at first, just sat down beside him on the couch, her eyes tired but soft. "How are you doing?" she asked, her voice gentle. Francis shrugged, the weight of the question heavier than he expected. I don't know. Trying, I guess. I've been feeling like I'm making progress, but it's slow. I know it's not enough. I don't expect it to be." Jennifer nodded, taking a sip of her wine. The silence between them was comfortable, not the uncomfortable silence they had shared for so long. It felt like they were on the same page for the first time in a long while. "You've been doing well," Jennifer said quietly, looking at him. "You've made a lot of progress, Francis. I know it hasn't been easy for any of us. And I know it's been hard for you, too. But I can see that you're trying. You're really trying." The words were a balm to his soul, and for a brief moment, Francis felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years, hope. "I've always tried to do what I thought was best," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I've been so focused on what I wanted that I forgot to think about what you and the kids needed. I can't undo the past, Jennifer, but I'm not going anywhere. I'm here now, and I want to make this work." Jennifer looked at him, her eyes softening. "I know. And I'm willing to try, too. We both have a lot of healing to do. But I see the change in you, Francis. And that means something." The conversation was a turning point. It wasn't a dramatic declaration of forgiveness, nor was it the grand reconciliation he had envisioned. But it was a recognition that both he and Jennifer were willing to take this journey together, even if the road ahead was still uncertain. And that, in itself, was a victory. Later that evening, after dinner, Francis found himself sitting in the living room with Luke. It had been weeks since they had really talked. But tonight, something felt different. Luke was sitting on the couch with him, watching a movie, but there was a shift in the air, a subtle change that made Francis feel like maybe, just maybe, they were finally finding their way back to each other. "Hey, Luke," Francis said casually, breaking the silence. "I know things have been weird lately. But I want you to know that I'm here for you. You can talk to me about anything. I know I haven't been the best dad, but I'm working on it." Luke glanced over at him, then back at the TV. He didn't say anything for a moment, but Francis could see him processing the words. Finally, after a long pause, Luke spoke. "I know, Dad," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "It's just weird, you know. You were always gone before, and now you're here, trying to fix everything. It's hard to figure out how to deal with it." Francis nodded, understanding. "Yeah, I get it. It's not going to be easy. But I'm here. And I want to be a better dad to you, Luke. I just need time. And I need you to be patient with me." Luke didn't respond right away. Instead, he shifted his position on the couch, making himself more comfortable. "Okay, Dad," he said, finally offering a small smile. "I'll try." That moment, that small exchange, meant more to Francis than any grand gesture ever could. It was a reminder that the process of healing wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up, day after day, even when things were messy, even when progress felt slow. It was about consistency, and it was about the willingness to keep moving forward, even when the past loomed large. The real breakthrough came the following Sunday. The family decided to take a walk together in the park, something they hadn't done in years. It wasn't a grand event, and there was no deep conversation during the walk. But there was a sense of togetherness, an unspoken understanding that they were moving in the right direction. Francis looked at his family, walking beside him, each of them in their own world, but all sharing the same space. They had a long way to go, but they were walking together. For the first time in a long time, Francis felt like maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. As they sat on a park bench, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Jennifer took his hand, and Emma smiled softly at him. Luke rested his head against his shoulder. And in that quiet moment, Francis realized that the real journey had only just begun. But he was no longer alone in it. He had his family with him. And that was enough. Weeks had passed since the family walk in the park. The weather had grown warmer, and the trees had sprouted new leaves, symbolizing the fresh start Francis was beginning to feel. There were still challenges ahead, no doubt, but he could sense that the darkness that had clouded their home for so long was starting to lift. The small victories were adding up, and Francis felt a renewed sense of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, things might turn out differently this time. It was Sunday morning, and the sun was shining brightly through the window, casting soft rays across the breakfast table where the family gathered. Emma, Luke, and Jennifer sat around the table, talking, laughing, and sharing a meal together. It felt almost normal, almost like the family they used to be, before everything had fallen apart. Francis couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude as he looked around at the familiar faces. There was still a long way to go, but in this moment, things felt right. "How was your week, honey?" Jennifer asked, passing the pancakes over to Emma. Emma smiled, her mood lighter than it had been in weeks. "It was good. I actually got a pretty good grade on my math test." Francis beamed. "That's great. I'm proud of you, Emma." "Thanks, Dad," she said, her voice still quiet, but there was a softness there that hadn't been present before. She wasn't giving him the cold shoulder anymore, but she wasn't fully open either. It was progress, small but significant. "I did well too," Luke added, grinning. "Got a goal in soccer practice yesterday." "Nice." Francis clapped Luke on the back. "You're really getting good at that." As the conversation continued, Francis found himself marveling at how natural it all felt. It was just a simple breakfast, but it was so much more than that. It was a glimpse into what life could be like if they kept moving forward, if they continued putting in the effort. He was determined to make it last. The phone rang, interrupting the warm moment. Francis glanced at the screen, an unknown number. He hesitated for a moment before picking up, already feeling the creeping tension that came with unknown calls. "Hello. Hi, is this Mr. Francis Hargrove?" "Yes, this is he. This is Patricia Foster from the state office. We've received your application for the business grant you applied for last month. I wanted to personally inform you that your application has been approved. Congratulations." A wave of relief flooded through him. After months of paperwork, meetings, and uncertainty, the grant was finally theirs. It wasn't a large sum, but it was enough to kickstart the new phase of his business, the one he had been so passionate about before everything had fallen apart. It was a small win, but it was a win. Thank you so much," Francis said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm glad to hear you're excited, Mr. Hargrove. We'll send over the official documents for you to sign, and then we'll move forward with the funds. If you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out." Francis hung up the phone, his heart still racing. He turned to Jennifer, who had been watching him closely. "We got it. The grant. It's finally happening." His voice shook slightly with excitement. "That's amazing." Jennifer smiled, her eyes lighting up. "This is a huge step for you. For all of us." He looked at her, a mix of gratitude and determination in his eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you. Without all of you. This is just the beginning, but it feels right. It feels like everything is starting to come together." The kids cheered, and the energy at the table shifted. There was something almost magical about the way they celebrated the moment together. It was as if, for the first time in a long time, they were truly a family again. No more walls, no more distance. It was real, and it was happening. Later that day, after the celebrations had died down, Francis went for a walk to clear his mind. The streets were quiet, and as he walked, he reflected on everything that had led him here, the mistakes, the struggles, and the moments of doubt. But also the moments of growth, the steps forward, the love that had slowly been restored. He had come so far. He had made amends, and though there was still a long road ahead, he had never felt more certain of his path. He stopped by the park where they had walked a few weeks ago. It was still early in the afternoon, and the park was nearly empty, save for a few joggers and people walking their dogs. He sat on one of the benches, watching the world move around him. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he pulled it out to see a text message from Jennifer. "I think Emma's ready to talk. I'm going to sit down with her later. Wish me luck." Francis smiled, feeling a tightness in his chest. He knew Jennifer had been working hard to rebuild her relationship with Emma, just as he had. This would be another crucial conversation, another step toward healing. But he had faith that it would go well. He had seen the small changes in Emma, the way she was beginning to soften, to open up again. They were all learning how to navigate this new chapter together. As he sat there, waiting for Jennifer's update, he reflected on how far they had come as a family. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy. But they were together. They were trying. And that, Francis realized, was what truly mattered. The willingness to keep trying, no matter how tough things got, was the key to making it work. He pulled out his phone and shot off a quick text to Jennifer, "Good luck. I'm proud of you both." A few minutes later, he received her response, "Thanks, I think we'll be okay. One day at a time." Francis sat there for a moment longer, feeling the weight of it all. He knew there were still challenges to come. There would be more difficult conversations, more tough moments. But he was ready. This time, he was ready. He had his family, and he had the strength to keep moving forward. With a deep breath, Francis stood up, his heart lighter than it had been in a long time. As he walked back home, he couldn't help but feel that the future was brighter than ever. They had survived the storm. And now, together, they were ready to build something new. It had been a few weeks since Francis had received the news about the business grant, and the momentum in his life had continued to build. His relationship with Jennifer and the kids was slowly but surely improving. They were beginning to work through their issues, one conversation at a time. But just when things seemed to be falling into place, Francis was faced with a new challenge, one he hadn't anticipated. His phone buzzed on his desk late one evening as he worked on plans for his new business venture. It was a text from Jennifer. "Jennifer, we need to talk." Francis felt his heart skip a beat. The words themselves weren't alarming, but there was something about the simplicity of the message that left him unsettled. He had grown used to the quiet moments of progress, the easy family dinners, the evening walks, the conversations with his children that felt like tiny victories. The last thing he expected was a sudden disruption. He quickly typed back, "What's going on?" The response came almost immediately. "Jennifer, Emma is struggling. She hasn't said much, but I can tell something's off. I think we need to have another conversation with her. I'm not sure she's fully okay yet." Francis set the phone down and leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. Emma had seemed more open in recent weeks, more willing to engage, to laugh, to share small parts of her life again. But Jennifer was right, Emma hadn't truly opened up about her deeper feelings. She'd been quiet, but she wasn't fully engaging either. There was still a wall between them. Francis knew that they weren't out of the woods yet, but he hadn't expected this to come so soon. He thought they were on a steady path. He quickly stood up from his desk, running a hand through his hair, and paced around the room. This wasn't the easy recovery he had hoped for. He had been so focused on the positive changes in the family, so relieved by the progress, that he hadn't considered that Emma might still be carrying the weight of everything that had happened in the past. After a moment of contemplation, he grabbed his phone and dialed Jennifer. "Hey," he said, trying to steady his voice. "What do you think is going on? Is she upset about something specific?" Jennifer's voice on the other end sounded tired, but resolute. "I don't know yet. But I can feel it. She's withdrawing again. And I'm worried, Francis. We've been so focused on moving forward that I think we've missed something." Francis sighed, his mind still racing. He had always prided himself on being able to solve problems, to fix things. But this was different. This wasn't something he could fix with a business deal or a grand gesture. This was about the heart, his daughter's heart. And for the first time in a long time, he felt powerless. "We need to sit down with her, don't we?" Francis asked quietly, the realization sinking in. "I mean, really talk." "Yeah," Jennifer agreed. "We've been giving her space, but maybe that space has turned into isolation. We can't let her carry this alone anymore. We need to show her that we're here for her, fully." They agreed to have a family meeting that evening, after dinner. It would be their first real conversation with Emma about how she was feeling since everything started to change. Francis couldn't help but feel a knot tighten in his stomach. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he also knew it was necessary. Later that evening, as the family sat around the table, the atmosphere felt different. Emma, normally quiet but engaged, was almost completely silent tonight. Her eyes were fixed on her plate, and she barely touched her food. Luke, sitting beside her, noticed the shift and kept glancing at her, but he remained quiet as well. Jennifer took a deep breath and looked over at Francis. With a quiet nod, they both knew it was time. Jennifer gently reached over and placed a hand on Emma's arm. "Sweetie," Jennifer began softly, "you've been so quiet lately. We've noticed you've been withdrawn, and we're concerned. You don't have to share anything if you're not ready, but we want you to know that we're here for you. We want to help. What's going on?" Emma's eyes lifted from her plate, but she didn't look at her mother. Instead, her gaze flicked to the window, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's nothing," she muttered. Francis could see the walls going up again, the familiar barrier that had been there before. He couldn't let that happen again. He took a deep breath and spoke, his voice steady but filled with compassion. "Emma," he said, his tone gentle but firm, "you don't have to carry everything by yourself. We know it's been hard. You don't have to pretend it's all okay when it's not. We just want you to talk to us, whatever it is. You've got both of us, your mom, your dad. We're here. Whatever it is, we'll get through it together." Emma's eyes flicked to her father, then to her mother, and back again. For a moment, it seemed like she might say something, but the words didn't come. She let out a shaky breath instead. "I don't know how to feel," she finally confessed, her voice cracking. "Everything's different now. You've both changed, but I'm still stuck. It's like I'm watching everything happen from the outside, but I don't know where I fit in anymore." Francis's heart clenched. He could hear the hurt in her voice, the deep uncertainty that had taken root inside of her. This wasn't just about her parents' marriage falling apart. This was about Emma trying to find her place in a world that had been turned upside down, and she didn't know how to make sense of it all. Jennifer reached for her daughter's hand, squeezing it softly. "We know this is hard, Emma. But we're not giving up on you. You don't have to figure it all out right now. We'll help you, every step of the way. You don't have to carry this alone anymore." Emma looked at her mother, then at her father, her eyes welling with tears. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but no words came. Instead, she collapsed into Jennifer's arms, crying quietly. Francis sat back, watching the scene unfold before him. It wasn't a perfect moment, but it was real. It was raw. They had reached her. Emma wasn't okay, and the journey to helping her heal would be long and difficult. But this was a breakthrough, a moment of vulnerability, a crack in the wall. They didn't have all the answers, but they were no longer pretending that everything was fine. That, for now, was enough. The next few days after Emma's emotional breakthrough were a whirlwind. It felt as though the dam had broken, and though the family had made progress, the emotional terrain was more complicated than Frances had anticipated. Emma had opened up, but there was so much more left unsaid. It wasn't a fix-all moment, far from it. But it was a start, and Frances could only hope that the conversation would lead to deeper healing. That evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Frances sat down on the couch beside Jennifer. They hadn't had much time to talk alone recently, and now that the house was quiet, they both felt the weight of the moment. Jennifer sighed, leaning back into the cushions. "I'm worried about her, Frances. I know she's trying, but I can feel that she's still carrying a lot of unresolved feelings. She hasn't been able to express everything, and I'm afraid she's holding back." Frances nodded, rubbing his hand over his face in frustration. "I know. I felt that too. She's been so quiet, and when she does speak, it's like there's still this wall. I don't know how to reach her sometimes." Jennifer turned to face him, her gaze searching. What if part of it isn't just the fallout from us? What if it's more about what happened before, the things we don't talk about? Frances blinked, caught off guard by the suggestion. "You mean before the divorce? You think she's still holding on to the way things were before?" Jennifer looked down at her hands, clearly conflicted. "No, I don't mean that. I mean, before. Back when we first got together. We've never really talked about how that all happened, have we?" The air between them grew thick with the weight of unspoken history. Francis felt a sharp pang in his chest as he remembered the beginning of their relationship, how they had fallen in love, how passionate and idealistic it had been. But they'd never truly acknowledged how the past had shaped their family, how their personal histories had lingered and festered. They just moved forward without ever revisiting the things that had haunted them. He shifted uncomfortably on the couch, the truth settling in like a stone in his gut. "I know what you're saying. We've never really talked about our pasts, before we even met, before we started this family. There are things I've never told you, things I've buried." Jennifer raised an eyebrow, her voice soft but steady. "Like what, Francis?" He hesitated, the weight of his thoughts pressing down on him. He hadn't expected the conversation to go in this direction, but maybe it was time. Time to finally address the shadows that had loomed over them for so long. "I haven't exactly been honest about the way I grew up. My family, my dad. There were things I didn't want you to know, things that would have made it harder for you to see me the way you do. But now I think maybe Emma needs to understand that we're not perfect, that we've both been shaped by our pasts." Jennifer watched him carefully, her expression softening. "Tell me. I want to understand. I think Emma does too, even if she doesn't know it yet." Francis looked at her, his heart pounding. This was harder than anything he had faced in a long time. But it was also a step toward healing for him, for Jennifer, and for Emma. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "My dad, he wasn't the man I needed him to be. He was distant, cold. There were times when I felt like I was invisible to him. He was always working, always chasing something that didn't matter more than the people right in front of him. I learned not to expect anything from him, and that's something I carried with me. It's why I pushed myself so hard in my career, it was the only way I knew how to prove my worth. I didn't know how to be present, to connect. It was like I was always running from something." Jennifer reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "Francis, I had no idea. Why didn't you ever tell me this before?" He looked away, the guilt heavy on his chest. "I didn't want you to see me like that. I didn't want you to know that I had so many broken pieces. I thought I could fix it all on my own, just bury everything and move forward. But maybe that's why I've always had such a hard time connecting with people, especially with you and the kids. I didn't know how to be vulnerable, how to let people in. Jennifer let out a soft sigh, the weight of his words settling between them. I'm so sorry you had to carry all of that. I can see now why you've struggled with being emotionally available. But Francis, you don't have to do this alone anymore. You're not alone in this. We're a team. Francis nodded, feeling both lighter and heavier all at once. I know. And I don't want to carry that baggage into the future, especially not for Emma. I need to start being more honest with her, with you, with myself. Maybe that's the key to healing. Jennifer smiled softly, her eyes glistening with understanding. We'll do it together. You've been so focused on fixing everything for us, but we need to fix ourselves, too. We need to be open and honest with each other, no matter how uncomfortable it gets. It's the only way we'll move forward as a family. They sat there in the quiet of their living room, a new understanding settling between them. Francis realized that their journey wasn't just about rebuilding their marriage or their relationship with Emma, it was about confronting the parts of themselves they had been hiding from each other. Only by shedding the old wounds could they move forward, together. Later that night, after Jennifer had gone to bed, Francis stayed up a little longer, reflecting on the conversation. He thought about his father, about the way he had been raised, and how those scars had shaped him into the man he was today. He thought about Emma, too, how much of her pain was tied to the things they hadn't addressed as a family. The next morning, he sat down with Emma before school. It was time to dig a little deeper. Emma, he began gently, there's something I need to share with you, something I never told you about my past. I want you to know that I understand what it's like to feel hurt, to feel like you don't belong. It's okay if you don't understand everything now, but I think it's important for you to know that we're all still working through things. And I'm here for you, no matter what. Emma looked up at him, her eyes softening just slightly. I didn't know you felt like that, she said quietly. Francis smiled, his heart aching with the realization that, just like him, Emma needed to understand that their pain wasn't something to hide. She needed to see that healing was possible, and that it was okay to be vulnerable. He reached out and gently ruffled her hair. It's okay. We're in this together, Emma. And no matter what happens, we'll always have each other. The days after Francis' conversation with Emma felt like a quiet storm. Calm on the surface, but the undercurrents were still powerful. The tension from the past few weeks hadn't completely dissipated, but there was an undeniable shift in the air. For the first time in a long while, the family was truly talking, opening up, acknowledging the emotional baggage that had been carried for far too long. Francis could sense that things were slowly moving in the right direction, but that didn't mean the path ahead was smooth. Emma had become more vocal in the days following their conversation. She wasn't fully opening up yet, but there were small, important signs that she was trying. She had begun to ask more questions about her parents' past, not just about their marriage, but about their individual histories. The curiosity in her eyes told Francis that she was trying to piece together a narrative that made sense of her world, one that had been shattered by the tumult of the last few years. It was a Saturday afternoon, and the family had decided to take a trip to the local park. It had become somewhat of a weekly tradition since they had started mending their relationship, a chance for everyone to step away from the chaos of life and just enjoy each other's company. The sun was warm, the sky clear, and there was a gentle breeze that made the leaves rustle just the way Francis liked it. But as they sat on a blanket, enjoying the serenity of the moment, Emma's voice cut through the quiet. Dad, she began, looking down at her hands in her lap. What was it like for you growing up? It wasn't an easy question. Francis had known that eventually, Emma would ask about his past. But that didn't make it any easier to answer. He looked over at Jennifer, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. This was his moment. A chance to finally break down the wall between them, to show Emma that her parents were human, too, flawed, imperfect, and still trying to figure things out. He cleared his throat, trying to gather his thoughts. Well, it wasn't easy. My dad, like I told you before, he wasn't really there for me. He was always busy with work, and when he wasn't, he was distant. I never really felt like I was enough for him. And my mom, she did her best, but we didn't talk much about feelings. I learned to keep everything bottled up. To hide my emotions. Emma looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and concern. So, you never really had anyone to talk to? Francis shook his head. No, not really. I had a couple of friends, but even with them, it was hard. I didn't know how to open up. I didn't even know what it meant to be vulnerable until I got older. There was a long pause as Emma processed his words. He could tell that she was absorbing everything, trying to make sense of the person her father was. The silence stretched on longer than usual, but Francis didn't rush it. Sometimes, silence was the best way for a conversation to sink in. After a few minutes, Emma spoke again, her voice softer now. I guess I always thought you were perfect. That you had it all together. Francis smiled faintly, the weight of her words settling on his chest. I'm far from perfect, Emma. I think you figured that out by now. She nodded, her lips curling into a small smile. Yeah, I guess so. But it's hard to think of you as human, you know. Like you had to go through stuff, too. Jennifer, who had been quietly listening to their conversation, leaned in. We all have our struggles, Emma. No one's life is without pain or challenges. We just try to figure things out as best as we can. Emma looked at both of her parents, her expression contemplative. I get it. I think. I don't know how to make everything feel okay again. Francis placed a hand on her shoulder, offering what comfort he could. It's okay to not have all the answers right now. Healing takes time. And we're not rushing it, Emma. You don't have to be okay right away. Just take it one step at a time. We're with you every step of the way. Jennifer nodded in agreement, adding, and remember, you don't have to carry all the weight by yourself. We're a family. Whatever you're feeling, we'll work through it together. The conversation hung in the air, but for the first time in a while, Francis felt like they were on the same page. Emma wasn't going to heal overnight, but she was beginning to understand that she didn't have to be perfect, that her parents weren't perfect either. They were all simply people, trying to make sense of their complicated, messy lives. As the afternoon sun began to dip, casting long shadows across the park, the family packed up their things and walked back to the car. The kids were laughing, tossing a ball back and forth as Francis and Jennifer walked behind them, hand in hand. The future was still uncertain, there were still challenges ahead, still moments of pain and uncertainty, but for the first time in a long time, Francis felt a glimmer of hope. The following morning, the family sat down to breakfast, a routine that had become increasingly normal again. The smell of pancakes filled the air, and the sound of laughter echoed through the house as the kids bickered over who would get the last piece of bacon. But despite the seemingly ordinary morning, Francis felt a shift within himself. He wasn't the same person he had been just a few months ago. He had opened up about his past, about his father, about his struggles. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And as much as it had been difficult to confront his own vulnerabilities, he realized that it was the key to unlocking a deeper connection with his family. Hey, Dad, Luke said, looking up from his plate with a mischievous grin. How come you never told me about all that stuff with your dad? I didn't know you had a bad guy story. Francis chuckled, the warmth in his chest spreading as he looked at his son. Well, Luke, I guess I just didn't want you to think that life had to be like that. I wanted you to grow up believing that things could be different. Luke thought for a moment and then shrugged. Well, you know what? I think you've got a pretty good story. I mean, you still turned out okay. So maybe there's hope for me too. Jennifer laughed softly. That's right, you've both got good stories to tell, even if they're not perfect. Francis smiled at the playful banter between his kids. It was moments like this that reminded him how far they had come. They weren't just a family healing from pain. They were a family becoming stronger, together. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? It was an early Sunday morning when Francis received a phone call that would challenge everything he thought he knew about healing, about family, and about himself. The call was from his estranged brother, Nathan, someone he hadn't spoken to in nearly 10 years. The sudden ringing of his phone startled him as he sipped his coffee, enjoying the quiet solitude before the family woke up. He glanced at the screen, seeing Nathan's name flash across it. His heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected to hear from Nathan, not after all this time, especially not after the way things had ended between them. He hesitated, staring at the screen, before finally swiping to answer. "Hello? Francis?" Nathan's voice came through, gravelly and uncertain. "It's me." "Yeah, I know," Francis replied, his voice guarded. He didn't want to sound cold, but there was so much unresolved between them. "What's going on?" "I know it's been a long time," Nathan began, his voice strained. "But I need to talk to you. About Dad. About everything. Can we meet?" Francis felt a tightness in his chest. He hadn't spoken to his father in years, and the pain of that relationship had never fully healed. But something in Nathan's voice made him pause. There was a rawness there, a vulnerability that Francis hadn't expected. It was as if his brother had finally reached the breaking point, and maybe, just maybe, this conversation could lead to some kind of understanding. I don't know, Nathan," Francis said, his voice faltering. "It's been so long. I don't even know where to start." "I get it," Nathan replied quickly. "But I've been carrying a lot of things around, and I can't do it anymore. I need to make sense of it, for my own peace of mind. Please, Francis. I don't know who else to talk to." Francis stood up from the kitchen table, walking to the window as he tried to gather his thoughts. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't been ready to confront his past, especially not with Nathan, the brother who had shared so many of those painful memories with him. But as much as he wanted to keep the walls up, part of him knew that this was the moment of reckoning he had been avoiding. "I'll meet you," Francis said finally, his voice quiet but firm. "Where?" "Same place we used to go, the old diner on Maple Street," Nathan answered. "I'll be there in an hour." After hanging up, Francis stood by the window for a long moment, his mind racing. The weight of the conversation ahead loomed large, but he knew there was no avoiding it. He couldn't keep running from the past forever. It was time to face it, no matter how uncomfortable or painful. An hour later, Francis found himself walking into the familiar diner. It was the same place he and Nathan had gone for years, sitting in the same booth, sharing meals and conversations that, in hindsight, felt like moments of innocence before everything had fallen apart. Nathan was already sitting at the booth when Francis arrived, his back to the door. He looked different, older, thinner, and there was a certain heaviness about him that Francis hadn't seen before. But there was something else too, something that hadn't changed, the unspoken connection between them. No matter how much time had passed, they were still brothers, bound by a shared history. Francis slid into the seat across from Nathan, the silence between them stretching for a moment before either spoke. "Thanks for coming," Nathan said, his voice quieter than usual. "I didn't know who else to turn to." Francis nodded, unsure of how to begin. "You've been carrying this around for a long time, haven't you?" Nathan gave a small, bitter laugh. "More than you know. It's not just about Dad. It's about everything. About how we both ended up where we are. How we've been so damn angry at each other for so long." Francis felt a pang in his chest. There had been so much resentment between them after their father's death, so much unspoken bitterness that neither of them had ever been able to resolve. It wasn't just about the estrangement, it was the years of suppressed pain that had festered like an open wound. "I don't know if I can fix everything," Francis said, his voice laced with exhaustion. "I don't know if it's even possible. We both." "I know," Nathan interrupted, his voice breaking slightly. "I don't expect everything to go back to the way it was. But I need to say it. I need to tell you why I've been so angry, why I pushed you away. And maybe you can understand." Francis met his brother's gaze, his heart beating faster. This was it, the moment he had been dreading, the moment of truth. He had no idea what to expect from this conversation, but he knew that it would change everything. Nathan leaned back in his seat, his eyes distant as he spoke. "After Dad died, I couldn't handle it. I felt abandoned. Like he had never really been there for us, but I had always wanted him to be. And when he was gone, I felt like I had lost everything, my father, my brother, everything I thought we had. But you seemed to be able to move on. You rebuilt your life, you moved forward, and I couldn't. I hated you for that. I hated that you seemed okay when I was falling apart." Francis listened intently, his heart heavy. He had always assumed that Nathan was just angry with him for other reasons, but hearing this, it made sense. Nathan hadn't been able to cope with their father's absence, and in his pain, he had pushed Francis away, as if distancing himself from his brother would make the hurt go away. "I didn't know," Francis said quietly. "I didn't know you were hurting like that. I didn't know you felt abandoned." Nathan's face softened, his eyes filled with regret. "I didn't want to tell you. I thought you just judged me for not being strong enough, for not being able to deal with it the way you did. But I couldn't just pretend anymore. I needed to talk to you." Francis sat back in his seat, his mind whirling. The pain between them was not one-sided. They had both been carrying the weight of their father's shortcomings, each of them coping in different ways, but neither of them had ever truly been able to confront their grief together. "I never meant to make you feel like you weren't enough, Nathan," Francis said, his voice tight. "I never knew how much you were struggling. I thought I had to just keep going, keep moving forward, and I left you behind. I'm sorry." Nathan gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, his eyes glistening. "I'm sorry too. For all the things I said, for all the times I pushed you away. We were both just so lost." There was a long silence as the weight of their words sank in. It wasn't the kind of moment where everything was magically fixed, but it was a beginning, a fragile thread that connected them again, after all these years of bitterness and silence. Francis felt a tear slip down his cheek, and Nathan reached across the table, placing a hand on his. It was a simple gesture, but it carried so much meaning. "We don't have to fix everything today," Nathan said softly. "But maybe, we can start by just being honest with each other." Francis nodded, his heart swelling with emotion. "Yeah. I think that's the only way we can start." The sun had barely set when Francis returned home from his meeting with Nathan. The conversation had been heavy, but it also felt like a significant moment. He had faced a part of his past that he had been running from for years, the pain, the unresolved anger, and the broken bond between him and his brother. It hadn't been easy, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a small sense of relief. A burden had been lifted, even if only slightly. As he entered the house, the familiar sounds of his family greeted him. Laughter from the living room, the soft hum of the TV, the smell of dinner cooking in the kitchen. The warmth of home was a stark contrast to the emotional weight he had carried into the meeting, and he paused for a moment, letting the sense of normalcy wash over him. But as he walked into the kitchen, he saw Jennifer standing by the stove, stirring a pot. Her back was to him, but she must have sensed his presence because she turned and smiled warmly. "How did it go?" she asked, her voice soft but with an undercurrent of concern. Francis paused for a moment, trying to put his emotions into words. It was hard, he said finally. But good. We talked. Really talked. About Dad. About everything. Jennifer set down the spoon and walked over to him, placing a gentle hand on his arm. I'm glad you did. I know it's been weighing on you for a long time. But how are you feeling now? Francis looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of exhaustion and relief. I don't know. A little lighter, I guess. But also still a bit unsure. It's not like everything's fixed, Jennifer. We still have a lot to work through. Jennifer nodded, her expression thoughtful. I know. But I think this was a good first step, don't you? He sighed and sat down at the kitchen table, running a hand through his hair. It's just hard to let go of the past. All those years of resentment, all the things we never said. I don't know if I'm ready to forgive yet. And I don't know if Nathan is either. Jennifer sat down next to him, her hand still resting on his. Forgiveness doesn't always come easily. And sometimes, it takes time. But it's okay to start slow. You don't have to rush it. You've taken a huge step just by talking to him, Francis. That's the beginning of healing, for both of you. He nodded, appreciating her words, but he still felt a sense of unease lingering in his chest. It wasn't that he didn't want to forgive Nathan, it was that he wasn't sure if he could. The years of anger and disappointment hadn't just disappeared with one conversation. And what about his father? How could he forgive the man who had been emotionally absent for most of his life? How could he let go of the feeling of abandonment that had shaped so much of who he was? Do you think it's possible to forgive someone like that? He asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Jennifer gave him a knowing look. I think it's possible. But only when you're ready. And only when you can see the person for who they are, not just for the hurt they caused. It's a process, Francis. You're not alone in it. As they sat in silence for a moment, Francis realized that Jennifer was right. Healing wasn't a linear process. It didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen all at once. But it was happening, slowly, bit by bit. And that was enough for now. The following day, Francis found himself at work, but his mind kept drifting back to his conversation with Nathan. He couldn't shake the feeling that something important had shifted between them. There was no immediate resolution, no dramatic reunion, but the walls between them had begun to crumble, even if just a little. It was a start, and for now, that had to be enough. His phone buzzed on his desk, interrupting his thoughts. He picked it up, surprised to see a message from Emma. Dad, I've been thinking. Can we talk later? He stared at the message for a few moments, unsure of what she wanted to discuss. Their relationship had been improving over the past few weeks, but there were still moments of tension. Emma had been quieter lately, more introspective, and Francis couldn't help but wonder what was going on in her mind. He quickly typed back, of course, honey. I'll be home by 6. As the day dragged on, Francis couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. What could Emma possibly want to talk about? Was she still struggling with her own emotions? After everything that had happened between them, Francis knew that there were still many unanswered questions, and he feared that some of them might be too painful to face. When he arrived home later that evening, Emma was already sitting at the kitchen table, her fingers tracing the rim of her water glass. She looked up as he entered, offering him a small smile, but there was something in her eyes, a heaviness, a sense of apprehension, that made him pause. Hey, sweetheart, he said, his voice soft. You wanted to talk. Emma nodded, her gaze dropping back to the glass in front of her. Yeah. I've been thinking about a lot of stuff. About everything, really. Francis pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. I'm listening. She took a deep breath, her hands fidgeting as she tried to find the right words. It's just. I feel like everything's changing. You and Mom have been doing better, but I don't know how to fit into all of it. I'm trying to, but it's hard. Francis felt his heart tighten. I understand. It's been a big change for all of us, Emma. And I know it's not easy. Emma shook her head, her voice shaking slightly. It's not just that. I feel like I'm lost. Like I'm stuck between the past and the future, and I don't know where I belong anymore. I don't know if I'll ever really feel okay with everything that's happened. Francis reached across the table, placing his hand over hers in a gesture of support. I'm here for you, Emma. I'm always here. And we'll work through this together. You don't have to figure everything out all at once. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of relief and sadness. I know. But I just don't want to be stuck forever, you know. Francis smiled gently, his thumb brushing over her hand. You won't be, Emma. It takes time, but you'll find your way. And no matter what, we'll be here, every step of the way. The days following his conversation with Emma were filled with a sense of quiet contemplation. While Francis had been able to provide her with a sense of comfort, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her struggles than she had let on. She had always been strong-willed, independent, but now, there was something in her demeanor that seemed off, a sort of guardedness that Francis couldn't quite penetrate. His thoughts constantly wandered back to the painful reconciliation with Nathan, the emotional weight of their conversation still hanging over him. The idea that the past could be healed seemed distant and almost impossible. There were so many layers of pain, so many years of missed opportunities to talk, and so many unresolved feelings that lingered, despite their best efforts to move forward. Yet, he couldn't ignore the fact that Nathan had tried. His brother had come to him in a moment of vulnerability, asking for understanding. It was a rare moment of openness, but Francis wasn't sure what to do with it. Could he truly forgive Nathan? Could he forgive their father, too? He had spent so many years pushing the pain down, burying it beneath his work, his family, and his day-to-day responsibilities. But now, with everything slowly coming to the surface, he was confronted with a question he hadn't been ready to answer: was it possible to move forward without first confronting the past? It was a quiet Friday evening when Francis decided to do something he hadn't done in years: take a walk alone. The cool evening air felt refreshing, the city streets empty except for a few scattered cars and late-night pedestrians. It wasn't that he had been avoiding the outdoors, but he hadn't taken the time to just think, to be alone with his thoughts. He had been restless all day, as if something inside of him was unsettled, and the need for solitude had grown to a point where he couldn't ignore it any longer. As he walked through the familiar streets of their neighborhood, memories began to resurface, some painful, some bittersweet. He passed the small park where he and Nathan had once spent hours playing basketball, the ball bouncing between them as they joked and laughed. That was before the tension had started to grow, before the rift between them had deepened. And then, there was the diner. The same diner where he and Nathan had met just days ago, where they had started to rebuild their fragile relationship. He wasn't sure what the future held for them, but he was beginning to understand that it wasn't just about reconciling with Nathan. It was about reconciling with himself. The sound of his footsteps echoed in the quiet street as he reached the end of the block. He turned a corner, his mind still lost in thought, when he saw a figure in the distance. At first, he thought it might be a stranger, someone else out for an evening walk, but as he got closer, the figure came into sharper focus. It was Nathan. Francis, Nathan called out as he spotted his brother. Hey! Francis stopped in his tracks, surprised. He hadn't expected to run into Nathan, especially not out here, in the middle of the night. What are you doing here? Francis asked, trying to sound casual but unable to hide the surprise in his voice. I could ask you the same thing, Nathan said with a half-smile. But I think I know. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I didn't want to leave things hanging. Not after everything we've said. Francis felt a pang of guilt. He hadn't exactly been eager to continue the conversation. It wasn't that he didn't want to rebuild their relationship, it was more about the weight of their shared history. The unresolved issues still lingered, and the idea of digging deeper into the past was something he wasn't sure he was ready for. Nathan stepped closer, his expression more serious now. "I've been thinking about Dad. About everything we've never said. It's been a lot to carry, and I think maybe we need to talk more. Really talk." Francis took a deep breath, feeling the familiar weight of uncertainty settle in his chest. "I don't know if I'm ready for that, Nathan. There's so much I don't understand. So much that hurts." Nathan nodded slowly, his gaze softening. "I know. I don't expect it to be easy. But we can't keep avoiding it. We've been avoiding the hard conversations for years, and it's time to stop. I want us to understand each other, you know. I want us to stop pretending that everything is okay when it's not." There was a sincerity in Nathan's voice that Francis hadn't heard before. It wasn't just about reliving the past for the sake of closure, it was about confronting the truth, no matter how difficult it might be. "I don't know if I can forgive him," Francis admitted, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "I don't know if I can forgive either of you." Nathan's expression didn't change. Instead, he stood there quietly, his hands in his pockets, as if he had been expecting this response. "It's okay. I'm not asking you to forgive me right away. Hell, I'm not asking you to forgive Dad either. I'm just asking that we stop letting this silence control us. We can't change the past, but we can at least be honest with each other about it." Francis looked at his brother, feeling the weight of his words. The silence between them was heavy, but there was something else there too, an unspoken understanding that, no matter how much pain lay between them, they were both willing to face it head-on. "I'm not sure I know how to start," Francis said quietly, feeling the vulnerability of the moment. "Neither do I," Nathan replied with a faint smile. "But maybe that's where we begin, by admitting that we don't know. By admitting that we need help. We've spent so many years pretending we're fine when we're not. Maybe it's time we actually deal with it." Francis stared at his brother, searching his face for any signs of insincerity, but there was none. He could see the sincerity in Nathan's eyes, the genuine desire for something more between them. It wasn't about perfect resolution, it was about healing, and that was something Francis wasn't sure he was ready for, but he knew he needed to try. "Okay," he said finally, his voice quiet. "Let's talk. Let's try to figure this out." Nathan's face softened, a genuine relief washing over him. "Thanks, Francis. I didn't know if you'd ever be willing to." As they stood there, in the middle of the quiet street, there was a sense of possibility, fragile and tentative, but real nonetheless. Both men knew that the road ahead would be long and full of challenges, but for the first time in years, they were willing to walk it together. The days following his walk with Nathan were filled with a quiet but palpable shift. Francis could feel the change, even if it was still too early to tell whether it was permanent. The weight that had been pressing down on his chest seemed just a little lighter, but he knew the road ahead would be long and winding. It wasn't as simple as shaking off the years of hurt and disappointment. But the seeds had been planted, and perhaps, just perhaps, things were beginning to change. At work, Francis found himself distracted. His mind wandered back to the conversation with Nathan, the emotions that had surfaced during their brief meeting, and the vulnerability they had both exposed. He hadn't expected to be at this point with his brother, not this soon, and certainly not after so many years of silence and resentment. But here they were, standing on the precipice of something neither of them fully understood. Later that week, Francis was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping a cup of coffee when Emma walked in. Her eyes were a little red, and she seemed distracted, the same apprehensive look from their previous conversation still lingering in her gaze. She sat down across from him without saying a word, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Francis put his cup down and leaned forward slightly. "Hey, kiddo. Everything okay?" Emma hesitated for a moment, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of the napkin on the table. "I don't know, Dad," she said quietly. "I've been thinking a lot. About everything that's happened, about you and Nathan, and, well, about me, too. Francis studied her, his heart tightening with concern. What do you mean? She took a deep breath before continuing. I've been holding on to this anger, this fear that I didn't even realize was there. And I don't want to keep doing that. I don't want to keep feeling like I'm stuck. Like I'm holding everyone at arm's length. But I don't know how to change that. I'm scared, Dad. Scared of what might happen if I let go of the anger. Francis felt a pang of guilt. He had always tried to be there for Emma, but he knew that they hadn't fully addressed everything. The fractured relationship with Nathan, the lingering issues with their father, it had all been hanging over them, making it hard to breathe sometimes. He reached out and gently took her hand, squeezing it reassuringly. You don't have to have all the answers right now, he said softly. We're all figuring this out together. I know things have been complicated, but we'll work through it. You don't have to face this alone, okay? Emma nodded, her voice shaky as she spoke again. But what if we can't fix it? What if it's too broken? Francis paused, choosing his words carefully. I used to think that way. I used to think that some things could never be fixed. But what I've realized, especially after talking to Nathan, is that healing doesn't have to mean everything goes back to the way it was. Sometimes, it just means accepting where we are and moving forward, even if it's not perfect. Emma looked up at him, her eyes searching. Do you really believe that? That things can get better? Francis took a deep breath and smiled gently. I do. But only if we're willing to face it. If we're willing to have the tough conversations, even when they're hard. Sometimes, the hardest thing is just being honest about what we're feeling. And we've both been holding on to things for too long. She looked down at their joined hands, her expression softening. I guess I'm scared of being hurt again. Of letting myself feel anything, really. I get that, Francis said quietly. But you don't have to face this on your own. I'm here, and we'll figure it out together. Maybe it's not about making everything perfect. Maybe it's just about being willing to try. Emma looked up at him, her expression a mix of hope and uncertainty. Do you really think we can do that? All of us, me, you, Nathan. Can we fix what's been broken? Francis smiled gently, the weight of their conversation sitting heavily in the air. I don't know. But I'm willing to try. And I think we all are. The following morning, Francis woke up early, the quiet of the house offering him a moment of clarity. He thought about the conversation with Emma and the weight of the words they had shared. She wasn't the only one who had been carrying around pain, fear, and resentment. He realized that he, too, had been holding on to things he didn't know how to let go of. The next step in his journey of healing would be to confront the deeper issue, his father. The man who had been physically present but emotionally absent. The man who had left a void in their lives that neither he nor Nathan had ever fully addressed. As much as he wanted to avoid it, Francis knew that the next conversation he had to have was with the man who had shaped so much of their lives, for better or worse. Francis sat down at his desk, his fingers resting on his keyboard, and he drafted a message to his father, not knowing what response he would get, or if he would get one at all. It felt like a risk, but Francis had never been more certain that it was one he needed to take. Dad, we need to talk. It's been too long. We can't keep pretending. Can we meet? He paused for a moment before hitting send, wondering if his father would even respond. Would he show up? Would he even care? The uncertainty gnawed at him, but at the same time, he felt a spark of something. Hope, perhaps, or maybe just the willingness to finally confront the past. To his surprise, his father responded. The meeting was set for the following Saturday at a cafe, neutral ground, as Francis had insisted. He wasn't sure what to expect. Would his father show up with the same cold indifference he had always displayed? Or would this be a chance for both of them to face the painful truth they had long avoided? When Saturday arrived, Francis found himself sitting at the cafe, waiting. His father hadn't arrived yet, and the anticipation was making his heart race. He wasn't sure if he was ready to face this moment, but he knew that there was no turning back now. The past had to be confronted. The days leading up to the meeting with his father felt like a slow, suffocating crawl. Each hour brought a mix of anticipation, dread, and uncertainty. Francis found himself awake at odd hours, replaying every possible scenario in his head. What would he say? How would his father react? For years, he had tried to move forward without ever truly confronting the man who had shaped so much of his childhood, and now, there was no avoiding it. Saturday arrived, a cold, crisp morning, and the weight of it all pressed down harder than Francis could have anticipated. The café, a small and cozy establishment tucked in a quiet corner of the city, seemed to mock him with its calm atmosphere. The air smelled faintly of coffee beans and freshly baked pastries, but none of it could settle the swirling storm inside him. Francis sat at a corner table, the hot cup of coffee in front of him long since gone cold. The minutes ticked by, each one stretching longer than the last. He checked his phone again, making sure he hadn't missed a message, but nothing had come through. His father had confirmed the meeting earlier in the week. There was no question that he was coming. At 11:05 a.m. The door to the café jingled as it swung open, and Francis' gaze immediately locked on the man who had entered. His father. For a moment, Francis froze. It was as though the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving him with nothing but the sharp sound of his own heartbeat in his ears. The man who had been the source of so much pain and confusion, the one who had built the walls between them, stood there, older now, his hair grayer than it had been all those years ago. His presence was as imposing as ever, and for a moment, Francis wondered how he had ever thought he could face this man without feeling some residual fear. His father's eyes scanned the room briefly, and then, almost reluctantly, he spotted Francis. He moved slowly toward the table, his steps careful, measured, almost as if he was unsure of what was expected. "You're here," Francis said, the words sounding more like a question than a statement. "Yeah," his father replied, his voice a little rough around the edges. He sat down opposite Francis without waiting for an invitation. "Let's get this over with." Francis raised an eyebrow at the bluntness, but it wasn't entirely unexpected. His father had always been direct in his own way, though that directness had often felt more like coldness than honesty. There was an awkward silence between them, the kind that had existed in their home for years. The tension was thick, so thick that Francis could feel it suffocating him. It wasn't that he didn't know what to say, it was more that he wasn't sure where to begin. How do you even begin to tackle a lifetime of unresolved anger, betrayal, and abandonment in a single conversation? Finally, Francis spoke. "I've been trying to figure out what to say for a long time now." His father looked at him with a raised eyebrow. "Well, you're not the only one." Francis exhaled sharply. "It's been over 20 years, Dad. And in all that time, we've never really talked. Not about anything that mattered." His father shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. "I'm not sure what you expect me to say," he muttered. "You've got your life, I've got mine. We've both moved on, haven't we?" Francis shook his head, the frustration rising again. "That's exactly it, Dad. We've both been pretending to move on. But we never dealt with any of this. With you, with me, with Nathan, none of it. You think we just forget about all those years? The way you shut us out." His father's eyes flickered with something, defensiveness, maybe, or guilt. But it was gone as quickly as it had come. "I did what I thought was best for you. You don't understand that." Francis leaned forward, his voice low but steady. "No, I don't understand. Because every time we needed you, you weren't there. Every time we tried to get close, you pushed us away. So yeah, maybe you thought you were doing what was best, but it didn't feel like it. It felt like we didn't matter." For a long moment, there was silence. Francis watched his father closely, searching for any sign of remorse, any acknowledgement of the pain he had caused. But there was nothing, just the same cold, distant expression that had always been there, like a wall that Francis could never breach. Finally, his father spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "I didn't know how to be what you wanted me to be. I didn't know how to fix what was broken. Maybe I wasn't the best father, but I didn't know any better. I didn't have anyone to teach me." Francis absorbed his words, feeling the bitterness of them settle deep inside. It was the same excuse he had heard for years, the same justification that had kept his father at arm's length. But this time, it felt different. There was something almost human in his father's admission, something that made Francis feel a little less angry, a little more understanding. "You didn't have to know everything, Dad," Francis said softly. "You just had to show up. And you didn't. And it hurt. But you don't get to tell me that I should just accept it anymore. I don't need a perfect father. I just need one who's willing to be here. To try." For the first time in the conversation, Francis saw a flicker of something in his father's eyes, a crack in the armor, a brief glimpse of vulnerability. "Maybe it's too late for that," his father muttered. Francis felt a pang of sadness. "Maybe," he said quietly. "But maybe it's not. Maybe it's never too late to try." The rest of the conversation didn't go much further. They spoke briefly about the past, about missed opportunities, about the things that couldn't be fixed. But in the end, Francis realized that the most important part of this meeting wasn't about finding answers, it was about the willingness to show up, to speak the truth, and to begin the long process of healing. As his father left the cafe, Francis sat alone at the table for a while, processing everything that had just been said. It wasn't the perfect conversation he had hoped for, but it was a start. And for the first time in years, he felt like he had a glimpse of the possibility of something better. Something real. The days following the meeting with his father felt strange, like stepping into an unfamiliar world after spending so many years in one that was all too predictable. The tension in Francis' chest had eased slightly, but he knew it wasn't over. It couldn't be. No single conversation could fix everything, no matter how cathartic it had felt to finally speak his truth. But something had shifted, even if only by a small fraction. When Francis arrived home that evening, he found Emma sitting at the kitchen counter, her eyes glued to the screen of her phone. She hadn't noticed him enter, so he stood quietly for a moment, watching her. Her shoulders were tense, her fingers tapping nervously on the edge of her phone. She looked up only when he cleared his throat. "Hey, kiddo," Francis said softly, crossing the room to grab a bottle of water from the fridge. "You all right?" Emma looked up at him, a fleeting smile crossing her lips before disappearing again. "Yeah, just thinking about stuff. I don't know, Dad. It's just been a lot." Francis set the bottle down on the counter and leaned against it. "I know what you mean. It's been a lot for me, too." She sighed, clearly weighed down by her thoughts. "I don't think I fully understood until today. I mean, I get why you've been upset, but now I feel like I'm just not sure how to fix it. You and Grandpa, and everything that's been broken. How do we fix that, Dad?" Francis looked at her, his heart aching. She was asking the same thing he had asked himself countless times. How do you fix something that feels irreparably broken? How do you repair the past when so much of it is shrouded in hurt and misunderstanding? "I don't think there's an easy answer, kiddo," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But what I'm learning is that fixing things doesn't always mean going back to how things were. Sometimes, it means accepting that things are broken, but that doesn't mean they're beyond repair. We're never going to be able to change the past. But we can change how we move forward." Emma blinked, as if she were processing what he was saying. "You think, we can really move forward? After everything?" Francis took a deep breath. "I do. But it's going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight. We're all going to have to be patient with ourselves, and with each other." She nodded slowly, still unsure but clearly feeling the weight of his words. I guess that makes sense. It's just hard to know where to start. I know, Francis said, offering her a small smile. It's hard for me too. But sometimes, you just have to start somewhere. Even if it's small. The next few days were a blur of normal life, work, errands, small talk with neighbors. But in the midst of it all, Francis couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more to be done. He needed to keep the conversation with his father going, but he didn't know how. Nathan had been silent since their last conversation, and it was clear that there was still unresolved tension between them. Their relationship was a delicate thing, like a fragile glass sculpture that had been shattered, the pieces too scattered to make sense of. Then, one evening, Emma suggested something that took him by surprise. What if we have dinner? You, me, Nathan, and Grandpa. The idea hit him like a sudden wave, sweeping him off his feet. The notion of bringing the two most complicated men in his life, his father and his brother, into the same room was terrifying. But in some strange way, it also felt like the next logical step. If there was going to be any hope of healing, of truly repairing the damage that had been done, it had to start somewhere. Why not here? Why not now? I'm not sure they'll agree to it, Francis said, a wry smile pulling at his lips. But I'll ask. Francis spent the next few days sending tentative messages to both Nathan and his father, feeling the weight of each word. He didn't expect either of them to say yes immediately, but somehow, just the act of inviting them felt like a step in the right direction. Maybe it was foolish hope. Maybe it was desperation. But at that point, Francis didn't care. He was tired of avoiding the inevitable. He was exhausted from pretending that everything could stay the same when nothing had been right for so long. To his surprise, his father responded almost immediately. All right. I'll come, he wrote. I'm not sure how this will go, but I'll come. Francis stared at the message for a few moments, unsure if he should feel relieved or even more nervous. But then Nathan's reply came through, slower, more deliberate, as if he were weighing each word carefully. I'll be there, Nathan wrote. For Emma. Let's keep it civil. Francis felt a surge of both hope and anxiety. A dinner with his father, Nathan, and Emma, it was a small victory, but it felt like a turning point. A chance to finally face everything that had been left unsaid for years. The night of the dinner, Francis found himself pacing in the kitchen, nerves creeping up on him despite the best efforts to remain calm. Emma was already setting the table, carefully arranging the silverware and glasses as if she were preparing for a special event. The air felt thick with anticipation. Every movement seemed to echo in the otherwise quiet house. The doorbell rang, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. Francis wiped his hands on his jeans before walking to the door. When he opened it, both his father and Nathan stood on the doorstep. His father, ever the stoic figure, nodded stiffly, while Nathan, though he wore his usual guarded expression, gave him a small, somewhat hesitant smile. We're here, Nathan said, his voice gruff but not unkind. Francis stepped aside to let them in, feeling his stomach twist into knots. This wasn't just another dinner, this was something much bigger. It was a moment of reckoning. A chance to finally start healing the rift between them. The dinner itself was an awkward affair at first. There were polite exchanges, light conversation about work, the weather, and nothing of real substance. But as the evening wore on, something shifted. The tension, while still thick, seemed to soften in small increments. Francis could feel it in the way his father looked at him just a little longer than usual, or in the way Nathan occasionally caught his eye as if testing the waters. Then, during dessert, Nathan spoke up, his voice quieter than usual. Look, I know this isn't easy for anyone. I know I've been a jackass, and I know I've made things worse. But I'm willing to try. For us. Francis blinked, the weight of his words settling on him like a revelation. His brother, the one who had always held his cards so close to his chest, was finally opening up. And for the first time, Francis believed that maybe, just maybe, things could change. The following week passed by in a blur. After the dinner, there had been more conversations. Small, hesitant ones that took place in the quiet moments of the day. They weren't grand reconciliations, but they were something. And Francis found himself clinging to the fragile hope that these small steps would eventually lead to something bigger. The morning after their family dinner, Francis woke up to the sound of his phone vibrating incessantly on the kitchen counter. Rubbing his eyes, he stumbled into the living room and grabbed the device. It was a text from Nathan. "We need to talk." Francis frowned. The message was brief, but there was an urgency to it that made his heart beat a little faster. Nathan wasn't one to send texts like this unless something important was on his mind. Francis quickly typed out a reply. "I'm here. What's up?" A few seconds later, Nathan responded. "Can you meet me at the park? I'll be there in 15. Francis didn't have time to think about it. He grabbed his coat, slipped on his shoes, and hurried out the door. Something about the way Nathan phrased his message made Francis uneasy. What did he want to talk about? Had their fragile dinner truce already started to crack? The park was quiet, as it usually was early in the morning, and the cold air bit at Francis' skin as he stepped onto the walking path. He found Nathan standing near a bench, his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets, his eyes fixed on the ground. "Hey," Francis said as he approached, trying to keep his tone light despite the nerves bubbling inside him. Nathan looked up, offering only a brief nod in acknowledgement. "I'm glad you came. I didn't think you'd want to meet this early. What's going on?" Francis asked, trying to read his brother's face. Nathan hesitated for a moment, as if trying to find the right words. "I've been thinking about what you said at dinner," he finally admitted, his voice low. "About trying. About moving forward." Francis raised an eyebrow, sensing the weight of what Nathan was about to say. "And? I don't know if I can," Nathan said, his voice cracking just slightly. He let out a shaky breath and ran a hand through his hair. "I've been angry for so long, and I don't know how to let go of that. I don't know how to stop feeling like I've been wronged by everything, by Dad, by you, by everything. I feel like I've lost so much, and I just don't know how to move on." Francis stood silently for a moment, processing Nathan's words. He could see the pain in his brother's eyes, the way his shoulders slumped as if carrying the weight of the world. Nathan had always been good at hiding his emotions, but Francis knew him too well to miss the cracks in his tough exterior. "I get it," Francis said softly, his voice steady. "I know what it's like to feel like you've lost something, or someone. To feel like the anger is the only thing holding you together because you don't know who you'd be without it." Nathan looked at him with a mixture of surprise and frustration. "But it's not that simple, is it? You can't just snap your fingers and make everything better. You don't understand how deep this goes." Francis nodded, his gaze softening. "I do understand. I've spent so many years resenting Dad, resenting the way he treated us, the way he cut us off, and how he never gave us a chance to be a family. But holding on to that anger, it doesn't help. It just makes everything worse. I'm not asking you to forget what happened, Nathan. I'm asking you to start letting go of the anger that's been poisoning you. For your own sake." Nathan was quiet for a long time. Francis could see him weighing his options, torn between his ingrained resentment and the desire for something different, something better. "I don't know how to do that," Nathan admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to let go of the past." Francis stepped closer, placing a hand on his brother's shoulder. "You don't have to do it alone. We're family, Nathan. We can figure this out together." Nathan finally looked up, his expression uncertain but softened. "Do you really think we can fix this?" "I don't know," Francis said honestly. "But I know we can't do it if we don't try." Over the next few days, Francis couldn't shake the conversation from his mind. It had been the most vulnerable moment he and Nathan had shared in years, but Francis knew it was only the beginning. Nathan had admitted his struggle, but admitting the problem wasn't the same as finding a solution. Healing wasn't going to be easy, and it certainly wasn't going to happen quickly. As the days passed, Francis made a concerted effort to keep the lines of communication open with Nathan. He knew that healing their fractured relationship would take time, but he was committed to showing his brother that change was possible. The more they talked, the more Francis saw the cracks in Nathan's armor begin to widen, revealing a man who was still deeply affected by their childhood, but one who was willing to try to let go of the anger that had consumed him for so long. One evening, just as Francis was finishing up dinner, his phone rang. It was an unknown number, but the area code suggested it was from California. Francis answered the call, unsure of who it might be. "Hello," he said, his voice cautious. "Francis?" "It's me, Dad," came the voice on the other end. Francis sat back in his chair, taken aback by the sudden call. "Dad? What's going on?" "I've been thinking a lot about our last conversation," his father said. "And? I'm sorry. I know I've screwed up a lot of things, and I don't know how to make it right. But I want to try. I don't know what that looks like, but I'm willing to try." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with emotion. Francis could hear the sincerity in his father's voice, the regret that had been absent for so many years. For a moment, he felt the wall between them begin to crack even more. "I don't know what that means yet," Francis said softly. "But I'm willing to try, too." The call from his father lingered in Francis' mind long after it ended. There was something about the sincerity in his father's voice that Francis hadn't heard in years, maybe ever. For the first time in a long time, he wondered if it was possible to rebuild something that had felt irreparably broken. But as the days wore on, he realized that even though his father had expressed an interest in trying, nothing was certain. The distance between them, both physical and emotional, had been years in the making. It wasn't just going to vanish with a few words. Francis spent the next few days reflecting on the conversation with Nathan and the unexpected call from his father. He thought about what it meant for his family, about what they could truly achieve if they all allowed themselves to start anew. It was terrifying, the idea of opening up those old wounds and trying to heal them. But it was also oddly liberating. In some strange way, Francis could feel the pieces of himself he had buried for so long stirring to life again. He decided to call his father, to see where this new path might lead. With a deep breath, he dialed the number he had not dialed in years. The phone rang for what felt like an eternity before it was answered. "Hello, Francis," his father's voice came through, still the same, but there was a softness to it now. "Dad," Francis began, his throat tightening. "I was thinking about what you said. About trying. And I think we should make that happen. I don't know what it looks like, but maybe we could start with something small. Maybe a visit. A weekend together." His father paused. There was silence for a moment, a crackling uncertainty between them. But when his father spoke again, there was a vulnerability in his voice that made Francis's chest tighten. "I'd like that," his father said quietly. "I think I've missed being a part of your life, Francis. I know I haven't shown it. But I've been thinking a lot about my own mistakes, and I don't want to live with the regret of not trying." Francis closed his eyes for a second, trying to process the flood of emotions threatening to overtake him. Was it possible? Could this really work? Could they really rebuild? "I'll book a flight," Francis said, his voice firm, even if his heart was still unsure. "All right. I'll see you then," his father replied, the finality of the words a small but meaningful step forward. Later that evening, Francis shared the news with Emma, who was both excited and nervous at the same time. She had remained relatively quiet during the family dinner, observing the interactions between her father and grandfather with the cautious hope of someone who wanted to believe but had been hurt before. "Are you sure this is a good idea, Dad?" Emma asked, her tone thoughtful, even a little guarded. I mean, things have been so messy for so long. I just don't want you to get hurt again. Francis smiled, the warmth of her concern comforting him. I don't know if it's a good idea or not, kiddo. But I can't keep running from it. If we want things to change, we have to try. We have to put in the work, even if it's hard. And yeah, there's a chance it might not work out the way we hope. But we won't know unless we take that first step. Emma was quiet for a moment, chewing on her lip. Then she nodded, her eyes softening. I just want things to be better, for you, for us. I want to know what it feels like when we're a family again, even if that's not exactly what it used to be. Me too, kiddo. Me too, Francis said, feeling the weight of his own desire for that kind of peace. The day his father arrived felt surreal to Francis. He had spent the past few weeks mentally preparing himself for this moment, but nothing could have fully prepared him for the reality of it. His father's presence in the same room felt both familiar and foreign at the same time. The last time they'd been in the same space together, the air had been thick with unresolved tension, unspoken words hanging heavily between them. Now, as the doorbell rang and Francis opened it to greet his father, he could almost hear the collective breath of his family being held. Hey, Dad, Francis said, trying to keep his voice even though his heart was pounding in his chest. Hey, son, his father replied, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. But there was something else there, something Francis had never heard before, hope. Dinner that night was a quiet affair. It wasn't awkward, exactly, but it wasn't exactly comfortable either. They all tried to be polite, to make the evening pleasant, but the tension was still there, like a faint hum in the background. Emma and Nathan spoke more than their father did, but that was nothing new. Even though their father was physically present, it often felt like he was miles away, lost in his own thoughts. After dinner, they sat in the living room, sipping coffee and tea. Francis had been preparing himself for the moment when the walls would come down, for the moment when the conversation would turn real. But it didn't come that night. Instead, they settled for surface-level discussions, weather, politics, even a little small talk about movies. It was as if no one wanted to take the plunge into the deeper waters of family history, where things got messy. Finally, his father stood up, clearly tired from the long flight. I think I'll head to bed, he said quietly. Of course, Dad, Francis replied, standing up to follow him to the guest room. I'll let you know if we need anything. His father paused at the door, his hand resting on the frame as he looked back at Francis. I appreciate you letting me come. I know I've been a difficult person to have in your life. But I want to change that. Francis nodded, feeling the weight of those words. For the first time, his father wasn't just apologizing for the past, he was acknowledging the need for growth. I'm glad you're here, Dad, Francis said, his voice steady despite the emotion that swelled in his chest. I'm glad you're willing to try. His father gave him a small, weary smile before retreating into the room, leaving Francis standing in the hallway, feeling something inside him shift. This wasn't the end of their journey. In fact, it was just the beginning. The days that followed his father's arrival felt like an emotional roller coaster for Francis. There were moments of quiet connection, and there were moments when the weight of the past seemed too heavy to ignore. Yet, each day brought small victories, small signs that maybe, just maybe, the effort was worth it. The mornings were the hardest. It wasn't so much the silence, but the subtle way that old habits crept back into their interactions. Francis noticed the way his father sat rigidly at the breakfast table, still somewhat distant, as though unsure of where he fit in their new life. Nathan had avoided eye contact for most of the meal, still grappling with the conversation they had had at the park days ago. But it was Emma who seemed to make the first genuine effort. She was always the most observant of the family, the one who could pick up on the smallest shifts in mood. One morning, as they sat around the table, she spoke up, her voice light but sincere. So, Dad, she began, looking directly at her grandfather, what's the weirdest thing you've learned about us since you've been here? Her question caught them all off guard. It was simple, even playful, but it broke the ice in a way nothing else could. Her father gave a reluctant chuckle, and even Nathan glanced up from his coffee, the corners of his mouth twitching into a small, amused smile. Her grandfather hesitated for a moment before answering. "Well," he said slowly, "I'll admit, I didn't expect so much." Silence. "It's strange how you all just sit together, each in your own world, but still in the same room." Francis laughed, despite the bittersweet truth of it. "Yeah, it's not the most dynamic family dinner, but we make it work." Emma grinned. "I think we can change that. I'm going to make the next dinner a family game night. That should get everyone talking." Francis couldn't help but feel a little grateful for Emma's optimism. Despite the tension still simmering beneath the surface, she was determined to bring them closer, in her own way. Over the next few days, the family fell into a rhythm of sorts, though it wasn't seamless. There were moments of awkwardness, like when Francis and Nathan went to pick up groceries and found themselves standing in the cereal aisle without speaking. The space between them felt as wide as ever, but both were trying, even if only in small, subtle ways. In the evenings, they often gathered in the living room to watch TV together, a tradition that had once seemed impossible to Francis. The presence of his father in the same space, watching the same shows, felt foreign, like a strange dream. But there was something comforting about it too. The quiet companionship, the shared experience of being in the same room, was a step, small but important. One evening, after the news broadcast ended, his father spoke up. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I didn't really get it before. What you all were going through, how hard it must have been to be without me for all those years. I was too selfish, too caught up in my own world to see what I was doing to you." Francis froze, his heart skipping a beat at his father's rare admission. For a moment, he didn't know how to respond. The apology was not one he had been expecting. It was as if his father's recognition of his own failures was the first step in acknowledging his role in the fractured family dynamics. "I think I always thought you'd be fine without me," his father continued, eyes downcast. "But I see now that I was wrong. I should have fought harder to stay a part of your lives." Francis swallowed, his throat tight. "We're here now," he said simply. "That's what matters. We don't have to fix everything in one go, but we can keep trying." There was a long pause, and Francis couldn't help but notice the way his father looked at him, his gaze full of regret and, strangely, a glimmer of hope. The breakthrough came when Francis decided to have a one-on-one conversation with Nathan. He hadn't pushed the subject too much lately, respecting his brother's space. But the silence between them was growing heavier, and Francis knew it couldn't stay like this. One evening, after everyone had gone to bed, he found Nathan sitting on the porch, staring out into the night. "Hey," Francis said softly as he stepped outside, taking a seat next to his brother. "Can we talk?" Nathan shrugged but didn't say anything. Francis could feel the weight of his brother's unspoken thoughts hanging in the air. He could sense the tension that was still there, the quiet resistance Nathan had to the idea of fully opening up. "I know this isn't easy," Francis began, his voice low. "I know you're angry, and I get it. But you don't have to do this alone. I'm right here. Whatever happens with Dad, with all of this, we can face it together." Nathan exhaled sharply, as though the weight of his emotions was finally spilling over. "It's not just about Dad," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's everything. I've spent so many years being angry at him, at you, at myself. I don't know how to let go of it. It feels like if I do, I'll lose everything. Like I'll be empty." Francis's heart ached for his brother. "You won't lose everything," he said quietly. "And you're not empty. You're human. We're all just trying to figure out how to move forward. But we can't do it by holding on to the past forever. You don't have to carry all of that weight by yourself. You don't have to keep it all inside." Nathan didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared at the stars for a long time, as if trying to process the enormity of what his brother was asking him to do. "I don't know if I can just forgive him," Nathan said, his voice cracking slightly. "Or forgive you." "I know," Francis said, nodding slowly. "And I'm not asking you to. But we can try. One step at a time. That's all I'm asking." For a long while, they sat in silence, the only sound the rustling of the leaves in the breeze. Francis wasn't sure if his words had made a difference, but he could tell that Nathan was thinking, really thinking, about what it would take to let go of the anger that had defined his life for so long. The weekend was quickly approaching, and with it came the looming presence of a family dinner, the first true test of their fragile truce. It was an opportunity to prove to each other that they could make this work, that they could move past the resentment that had poisoned their relationships for years. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was the moment that could change everything. As Francis stared at the family photo on the wall, a picture from a time long ago when things had seemed simpler, he found himself wondering if they could ever get back to that. Or if, instead, they would build something entirely new. Something stronger, maybe. Something different. But whatever it was, it would be built on the foundation of those first fragile steps. The weekend was finally here, and Francis couldn't shake the sense of nervous excitement that had settled deep in his chest. His father was still in town, and while there had been progress over the past few days, nothing had yet been tested. This evening's family dinner would be the true litmus test, the moment where words would have to be backed by action. The day was spent in a flurry of activity. Emma insisted on cooking a big meal, something that would encourage conversation and bonding. Francis knew it wasn't just about the food, it was about setting the stage for the evening, creating an environment where things could finally shift. "I'm making your favorite tonight," Emma said to Francis as she prepared a pot of pasta. "I think a little comfort food is what we all need." Francis smiled, leaning against the counter. "I'm hoping it's a good distraction. Not sure if I'm ready for tonight, but at least we'll be well fed." It wasn't just the food that worried him, it was the weight of the moment. His father was here, sitting just a few feet away, trying to be a part of this family again. And Nathan. Nathan had been quiet the entire day, still processing everything that had happened over the past few weeks. But there was a quiet sense of hope too, a hope that they could turn this into something meaningful, even if it wasn't perfect. He had to believe that it was possible. As the evening approached, the house was filled with the delicious scent of garlic and tomatoes. The table was set, the chairs aligned perfectly, an intentional order, as if everything in their home could be set right with a well-organized dinner. But Francis knew it wasn't that simple. He walked to the living room, where his father was sitting, flipping through a magazine. He had his hands clasped together, his posture stiff, as if waiting for the storm to pass. Francis paused, noticing the subtle tension in the air. "You ready?" Francis asked, leaning against the doorway. His father looked up, his face softening as he met his son's eyes. "I think so. But I'm not sure about this. It feels like a test." Francis nodded. "It is. But I think we're all ready for it. We don't need to have it all figured out, Dad. We just need to show up." His father didn't say anything, but the brief nod he gave was enough. They were ready, even if they didn't fully know what they were walking into. Everyone gathered around the table, the silence that had plagued their meals in the past still lingering. But this time, it wasn't suffocating. It was a calm before the storm, the quiet anticipation of what was to come. Emma, as always, broke the tension first. "So, anyone have anything interesting to talk about tonight?" she asked, setting the salad bowl in front of her father. "Come on, I know we've all got something to say." Nathan was the first to speak. "Well, we could talk about how Dad's finally trying to make up for all those years of missing out on our lives." His tone wasn't harsh, but there was an edge to it, a reminder that the past couldn't just be erased with a few nice words. Francis felt a lump in his throat, but he didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked to his father, who seemed to shrink slightly under the weight of Nathan's words. But then, surprisingly, his father spoke up. His voice was steady but laden with emotion. "I know I can't change the past, Nathan. But I'm here now, and I want to be a part of your lives, if you'll let me." The room fell silent. It was a rare, vulnerable moment, one that none of them had seen coming. Francis watched as Nathan looked at their father, his expression softening just a little. He wasn't ready to forgive, but there was a flicker of understanding, the smallest inkling that maybe, just maybe, there was room for something new to grow. Emma cleared her throat, clearly trying to steer things in a more light-hearted direction. Okay, no need to get all deep just yet. We've got pasta and garlic bread, people. Let's focus on the food." That small distraction helped break the tension, and they dug into the meal. As they ate, the conversation drifted, the awkwardness beginning to fade. There was still an undercurrent of unease, but for the first time in a long while, they were sharing a meal without the ghosts of the past hanging over them. After dessert, as the dishes were cleared away and the night stretched on, the true test arrived. Francis and Nathan found themselves alone in the living room, his father and Emma taking a walk outside. There was a sense of stillness in the house, and Francis could feel the heaviness that remained between him and his brother. "Can we talk?" Francis asked, his voice quieter now. "I know you're still angry, Nate. I can feel it. But we have to figure out how to move forward." Nathan didn't meet his gaze at first, staring down at the floor. The silence stretched between them, thicker than the conversation had been a few days ago. But finally, Nathan spoke, his voice almost a whisper. "I don't know how to let go, Francis. It's been so long, so much anger, so much disappointment. I've built this wall around myself, and I don't know if I can tear it down." Francis sighed, sitting down next to his brother. "I get it. I'm not asking you to tear it all down in one night. But we can't keep pretending nothing happened. We can't keep pretending that we're okay with how things are. It's not just about Dad, it's about us, too. We've been holding on to this for so long that it's become a part of us. But maybe it's time we let some of it go." Nathan met his gaze then, his eyes full of frustration and exhaustion. "What if I'm not ready? What if I don't want to forgive him, or even you?" "I'm not asking you to forgive anyone tonight," Francis said, his voice firm. "I'm asking you to just try. To be open to the possibility that we can rebuild this family, even if it's not perfect. And if you can't do that now, I get it. But don't close yourself off forever." Nathan stayed silent for a long moment, but eventually, he nodded. "I don't know, man. But I'll try. I'll try, for you." It wasn't a clean resolution, nor a perfect one. But it was a beginning. The tension that had once felt unbearable was slowly lifting. The cracks in the foundation of their family, although still present, were no longer insurmountable. For the first time in years, they had taken steps toward healing, even if they didn't have all the answers. As the night drew to a close, Francis stood by the window, looking out into the darkened backyard. His father and Emma were still talking outside, the sound of their voices drifting in through the open window. He felt a strange sense of peace, mixed with a cautious optimism. Maybe they wouldn't fix everything in one night. Maybe it would take weeks, or months, or even years. But they were trying. And that, Francis realized, was the most important thing. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?